Thank you for downloading this Council on Foreign Relations video. CFR is an independent national membership organization and nonpartisan research center. For more information, please visit us online at cfr.org.
Good afternoon. Welcome to
Добрий день.
today's Council on Foreign
Хочу запросити
Relations
вас
meeting.
до сьогоднішньої зустрічі.
I'd like to ask you to turn off,
Хотів би попросити
completely turn
вас
off and not leave on
повністю
vibrate all your
виключити
phones,
всі ваші
Blackberries,
телефони
all
та
wireless
BlackBerry,
devices,
усі
any other electronic
апарати,
gadgetry, so we make sure none
будь-які
of those
електронні
interfere
засоби,
with
які
the
можуть
sound
нам
system.
завадити з
I would
нашою
like to
звуковою
remind the
системою.
members that this
Хотів би
meeting
сказати,
is on
що
the record.
це
My name is Peter
записується.
Ackerman. I'm a member of the board of the
Я
Council
є
on Foreign
членом
Relations, and I also have the honor
правління
of being executive producer
цієї
of
ради,
Orange Revolution, a
і
documentary
я
that's going to appear on the public broadcasting system
розробляв документи
this fall.
про
In my
помаранчеву
experience,
революцію, яка
great
розпочалася
documentaries
на
like
різні
great
засоби
movies
масової
tell compelling
інформації.
stories
І
featuring
ми,
heroic figures who
звичайно,
willingly
зазначили усіх
willingly
героїв,
endure
які
personal sacrifice for a greater good.
персонально
Our speaker,
здалися до
Victor Yushchenko,
свого великого
a
вкладу,
short 5 years
і
ago,
серед них
risked his
Віктор
life
Ющенко,
for the principle that his fellow
який
citizens have the right to pick their leaders by free,
висловив свої
fair,
принципи, які він
and accurately
відстоював,
counted
захищаючи громадську думку та
Today is
громадські
considered by
права.
many an iconic
Зараз
figure, much
багато
admired for the courage and
людей
leadership
вважають
he
президента
displayed through the
Ющенка
tumultuous Orange
фігурою,
Revolution
ніби
until
іконою
his election to the office of
процесу
President of
свободи.
Ukraine
І
in December
коли він прийшов до
2004.
влади у 2004
What may not
році у
generally be
грудні,
known is that our guest
ми
also had a
дізналися,
distinguished
що
career as governor of the National Bank of Ukraine
він мав дуже
for
чудову
6 years
кар'єру
until becoming Prime
голови
Minister
Національного
from
банку, був
1999 to
прем'єр-міністром з
2001.
99 року по 2001.
President Yushchenko is also a
Президент
well-regarded
Ющенко
economist in his country, becoming a member of
великим
the National
економістом
Academy of Economic Science.
Є членом Національної
President
академії
Yushchenko was
України.
born in 1954 to two parents who both became teachers.
В 54
And in
році
an
у родині
interesting
вчителів
twist on contemporary gender stereotypes, his father taught English and his mother taught math and
батько
physics.
викладав
Our
англійську
speaker is
мову,
married to
а
Katrina,
мати
who's
фізику
here
та
today,
математику.
a Chicago native, and has 5 children and 2 grandchildren.
Він зараз
So I'd
має
like to ask the President
п'ятеро
to
дітей.
offer his remarks, which will last about 15 minutes. I'll ask an opening question, then we'll have the members ask the questions they're interested in. Mr. President.
Свої питання. Будь ласка, пане президенте. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear ladies and gentlemen, guests, this is a great honor for me to have this discussion with you today and to express on the issues that are of mutual interest for us. We're going to discuss Ukraine. We're going to be speaking about its economic development, political development, and social. What has changed in Ukraine for the last 4 years, and where we are today. What are the challenges that Ukraine is facing? And we may also consider foreign political issues, bilateral agenda. And let's not waste time. I'd probably start with my introduction. I'd start saying, dear guests, that I'm very proud of what's happened in Ukraine in the last 4 years, and I'm telling you this with absolute confidence. We have lived a very important years for the Ukrainian establishment, and I would like to give several arguments about that. Let's start with the economy, where it's probably not that many discussions going on. If taking our development for the last 3.5, 4 years, it was the first time when we came up with the economic performance on the annual basis from 7 to 7.5% of GDP growth. There's never been such dynamics in Ukraine in the last 18 years. This is the highest economic development that the independent Ukraine ever witnessed. If we speak about industrial sectors, the industry grows at 17%, machine building 28%. When speaking about the agriculture, we had two major records in our harvest, 53 million tons and 45 million tons of grain. And we came up as the fifth biggest exporter of grain in the world, and it's been already in the last 3 years in the fourth place on corn exports, second place on barley exports, and the first place on sunflower seeds. So I should say that this process can be called a renaissance. We return what always belonged to Ukraine. If we speak about the agricultural development, this was always a breadbasket, and it was a country that was actively operating in external markets. And in the last 3 years, Ukraine has proven again that we're in an active phase of developing our economy. It is obvious that things are going right in the financial sector. If speaking about state budget, it's grown in the previous 3 years. It at least doubled in the previous 3 years. If mentioning the foreign direct investment, 4 years ago we had only 6.8 billion US dollars, while today we have 38. So therefore, we can confidently say that 90% of the total investment was the investment that we received in the last 3 years. Apparently that gave positive impetus on social standards, on employment rate. It's already been 3 years when we have positive labor migration. More people come into Ukraine than leave it. If we speak about social standards, for instance, I could possibly give you such an example as just one index as pensions. 4 years ago, the minimum pension was something like $8, and today it is $100. And similar dynamics there is on salaries and living minimum. So what's happened for the last 3 years in the economic life was the performance that we could only dream about. We managed to form a high macroeconomic culture that led to successful economic evolution, price and money stability, the development of budgeting processes, and undoubtedly, and I want to say it once again, but obviously this is very important to emphasize, that we have very good progress in social standards and social development. I want to say it once again, Ukraine has never witnessed such dynamics, and this is probably a great response what competitive economy is giving, what public finances are given within the framework of high macroeconomic culture. And the third thing I would like to tell you about and that's probably I would put on the first place, those who visit Ukraine in the last years, you obviously could see a different country. This is a democratic country, first of all. This is probably the biggest accomplishment that is probably given less value, like air. When you have it, you don't see it, you don't mention it, but it's probably the biggest thing, and that ensured our progress and dynamics that I just mentioned. You know, I don't have to give any scaled comments, but just say about one great accomplishment. We do have the freedom of speech. We do have free journalists. We have journalists that could be shot 4 years ago, who could receive news only from one spot, from the president's cabinet, and that's how the entire country lived and thought. And I'm deeply convinced that free journalists is probably a key to our freedom. Well, this is one of our biggest accomplishments, is the free journalists. I'm not saying this just to say that it was so much easy, because in this very matter we still have certain problems. We need to make free journalists free from their orders, how to make them free from the clans, and many other challenges that the Ukrainian journalists are still facing. But on behalf of the state, I can say that this is a genuine and free profession. Whether we speak about fundamental things we attained for the last 4 years, the freedom of choice. The most dramatic what happened 4 years ago that actually brought people to the streets and gave birth to the Orange Revolution were the facts that teachers were shown who they should vote for, and medical people and soldiers were shown who they should have voted for. So that was about students and anybody. But in the last 4 years, we had 2 pre-term parliamentary elections. One pre-term and one regular. In both cases, the opposition would win. And that's interesting. The results of both elections were recognized by all the observers. From Europe, from the States, from the East, all recognized that the elections were just, legal, and truthful. That was the evaluation of those results, and in both cases the opposition would win. Those were honest and just elections. With this, I'd like to say that one of the most fundamental accomplishments we have is that through democracy, through the freedom of choice, we gave answer to any challenge that Ukraine faced, even if we speak about very baffling processes going on in the Ukrainian parliament and government. If we have enough time, I'll tell more details. So, when summarizing the last year, I think the assessment came from Freedom House, when Ukraine, for the first time in the 18-year history, actually belonged to the group of free countries. And we covered the pace for the 17 years. But the biggest accomplishment is that our country is today a free democracy. And that's the accomplishment of the last 3 years. So I thank you very much, Mr. President, that you introduced myself as an economist, as a financist. It's very easy for me to speak about the economy. But first of all, I'd like to say that the biggest success we had in these years was the political success. Because we accepted the values and principles of civil life organization purely on the democratic basis. And that gives a lot of optimism, because it is purely on this basis we can speak about our future. And in this context, I'd like to comment some very important positions without which it would be really hard to speak about Ukraine's face and the years it lived through in the last 3 or 4 years. Obviously, relations with the United States are strategic for us. These are friendly relations. These are relations between very good friends. This is the country that we communicate freely and openly. And we openly speak about what we need. That we need a very intensive dialogue, very close political, diplomatic relationships. And that's why within the framework of the last visit of the U.S. Vice President, we agreed about the strategic group. We came up with a roadmap. We signed strategic agreement strategic agreement in December last year. This means obviously that the two countries have very high-ranking status of relationships, and they have the action plan that determines the agenda for 2009, 2010. We obviously will be repeating that we are very interested in genuine strategic relationships and very dynamic relationships. That's why this is a particular address to you, dear colleagues, dear friends. Do not forget Ukraine. Always remember that we are in need for our contacts, because things I'm going to be speaking are not only challenges for the Ukraine, but also for the entire world, and we have to solve those problems together. I'm very proud that because, and owing to such dynamic relations with the United States, we managed to solve issues that we couldn't solve 3 years ago. The Jensen-Vanik amendment was cancelled, and we became the members of WTO. We radically changed the intensiveness and results of our relations with the European Union and NATO. And I'd like to touch upon those relations a bit, because they are very important to characterize our Ukrainian policy. If speaking as of today where we are in our relations, for instance, with the European Union, then I should start speaking about what we are working on today. Those are 3/4 of completed work on developing the association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. And I hope that in December this agreement will be signed. We do not see any serious political or applicable problems. For the first time, the association agreement will have a part which fixes the free trade area between Ukraine and the European Union. It will be the first time when this agreement will contain security chapter. So we're going to have an agreement which has no analogies according to its seriousness. The third and the fourth wave came through the association agreement. I mean, those countries that managed to have accession to the European Union, but the agreement we have has no analogies whatsoever. So we signed the protocol and joined the Bologna process. It's the first area where Ukraine entered and became the member of the European educational area. So starting from 2010, the Ukrainian diplomas will be fully adapted to the European standards, and the same is related to the scholar grades. Today we're working on the harmonization of our electricity systems. This is applicable integration for us. Today, one of the working groups is working on common sky with the European Union. You probably remember the March declaration that was signed on the gas transit system of Ukraine, that we signed with the European Commission. And today we work on Ukraine's joining the European Energy Association. 3-4 months ago, we accepted the feasibility study on in Europe it is called Euro-Asian Oil Transport Corridor. This is the project to supply Caspian oil through Caucasus and the Black Sea, through Odessa Brody pipeline straight to the European Union. the project that was financed, the feasibility study that was actually financed by the European Commission. And we believe that it's one of the most feasible and successful projects to supply Caspian oil through Ukraine to the European Union. This is the most attractive and the most economically efficient project. This and many other projects with the European Union and the EC were fruit of the last 3-4 years. And our relations have become radically different. This is a very thick portfolio of different projects that we consider, and I'm very proud and happy that the dynamics of relations we have with the European Commission, this was never the case in any part of Ukraine's history of relations with the EU. If we speak about regional issues and regional policy, then it would be probably very important to say about Ukraine's relations with Russia. They are not the best. They are not like making you proud of, because I'm sure that neighbors need to have better relations and should be able to solve even inherited challenges. But with that, I'd like to say that we have a very clear agenda of our relations with Russia. Obviously, there will be time when Russians will find guts and wisdom and possibilities to welcome such relations. Obviously, we have the whole range of challenges we have to solve, and we would be willing to do that, but not everything is now within Ukraine's will. What's the most sensitive for our relations? I would mention probably 3-4 issues, so it would not be the complete list. I'd start with the border issue. This year, Ukraine celebrated the 18th anniversary of its independence, but unfortunately, the entire surface border between Ukraine and Russia is not demarked. We don't have any single foot of our border where we would have legitimate and approved line of borderline. And it's not a political issue that stand on the way to take the problem off. We don't have these problems on the surface border. We had 27 rounds of negotiations about that. And we finalized them and have taken away all the problems about the surface border. And we believe that the both sides, from the technical standpoint, are for a long time ready to sign the respective agreement and demark the border. They should clearly state where the land of one country ends and where the rules of one constitution ends and where a different one starts. Unfortunately, that work is not being done, and this is not our fault. However, I always put those things into our agenda, and I recently sent a letter to the Russian president with a proposal to come back to that issue again. The situation is quite complicated on delimitation of frontiers, of water frontiers, and especially such sensitive points like Tuzla Island, where the territory that belongs to, and from the administrative standpoint, belongs to Ukraine, and on all the administrative maps of the Soviet Union, it always belonged to Ukraine. And obviously, we will never approach this issue with any other conditions because Tuzla Island would always remain Ukrainian. But unfortunately, Russians have different thoughts about that, which are not acceptable for us whatsoever. They are not and will not be acceptable. Another serious problem is the presence of the Russian Black Sea Navy deployed in the Crimean Peninsula. The Ukraine's position is clear and transparent. The agreement that was signed in 1997 foresaw 20 years of Russian Black Sea Navy deployment until May 27th, 2017. But the Ukrainian side believes that the Ukrainian constitution prohibits any military bases deployed in the Ukrainian territory. I mean, military bases of foreign states. This is an imperative and direct norm of the constitution. Obviously, agreements are signed and have to be fulfilled. We hope that the Russian side and the word that they gave back in 1997 will be kept, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet will leave the country before May 27th, 2017. We truly want to cooperate, and we declare that the Ukrainian side will fulfill all the conditions foreseen until the year 2017 on the Russian Black Sea Navy deployment. However, there are many problems there, starting from the issue of the land lots and their application, the application of real estate and radio frequencies, of the coast navigation that fully belongs to the Russian side. However, there was nothing like that in the agreement, and there are many other issues. So what we mean that we want to have normal political and diplomatic communication about that. We do not try to avoid it. We want to have an open discussion about that. We want the results of those discussions to be delivered to the two nations, to the two countries, so that the communities would be informed how the countries approach those problems. You know, the fathers of the Ukrainian constitutions, when they adopted it in 1996, they told that the biggest priority and national interest is the absence of any foreign military bases in the Ukrainian territory. And the agreement that was prolonged until 2017 was concluded by the previous administration only because there were no conditions enough to make the fleet leave right away, because this matter requires a great deal of preparatory work. You cannot do it in a year or two, and we still hope to find understanding about that, but in the core, the Ukrainian constitutions will always be. Obviously, the issue of our integration to NATO adds more complicated things into the Ukrainian-Russian relations, and here I would like to give you several pieces of information as an official Ukrainian position. First of all, when we speak about our NATO integration, it's not about how to form new threats or challenges for any other third party. However, that matter is very often speculated in the Russian press. This is not our target to make it harder for something, but this is the target of giving the answer to this sufficient national security policy. Just a little bit of a history. Just in the last 70 years, since 1917, we declared our independence 6 times, and 5 times we lost it. And there was only one reason behind: the international factor. And that's why we need to take out lessons. The only way to, and not only for Ukraine, on the European continent, to have the most perfect security and defense policy is to have the status of pan-European collective security. There is no other answer to this. We don't want to lose our independence like we did many times in the 20th century. That's why NATO membership and the Ukrainian independence, I'd say, are synonymous. That's why we speak about our natural aspiration. When we are told that Ukraine will enter NATO and we're going to have a NATO base in Sevastopol, we say no. Our constitution gives a guarantee that no foreign military base, neither Russian or no other country, this is the imperative norm of our constitution. We are often reproached that they can install some nuclear deposits and nuclear weapons over there. I once again come back to the history of 1994, when Ukraine did an unprecedented step, when we took away 2,000 warheads unilaterally from our territory. And then in 15 years, after 15 years, we were told that, okay, you guys try to deploy some other military nuclear missiles, and we gave our international guarantees that Ukraine would not take such steps anymore. And the same can be said about our territory, which will not be used to threat other countries. And the same is about our sky. We want to find a clear answer, a clear and open security policy for our country, and this is where our aspiration is, to get integrated to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And lastly, because I can see that Mr. Chairman already is looking at me and that I already used my time limit, about the political situation in Ukraine. I will not be picturing it in very much of detail, because I'm going to answer questions. But a couple of things I would like to mention. The first thing that I would like you to know is that the Achilles heel of the Ukrainian domestic policy and the problem of political instability is in the fact that back in 2004, this is not only in my opinion, but this is the opinion of many politicians in Ukraine and European experts and international experts, was a very rushful and vague political reform that led to the loss of balances and parities that existed between different authorities in Ukraine. I mean the parliament, the president, and the prime minister, the government. Unfortunately, changes to the constitution that took place in 2004 led to the situation that Ukraine transferred from the presidential form to the parliamentary form of governance. But at the same time, very scaled systemic issues on organizing authorities and put them into order was not organized. I think experts clearly know about that, so that's why I'm speaking about that very synthetically. So there's only one way to find those balances and parities which would be necessary to balance different branches of power. This is the constitutional reform. In March this year, I introduced an updated draft of the constitution to the parliament, and I sent it to the Venice Commission, and we received their vision from the Venice Commission. That means that mentioned that the changes that the president offers are the changes, the proposals made by the president are key and very important, fundamental, and the Venice Commission gave very high evaluation to those changes and amendments. Things that Ukraine never changed about the construction of the authorities, and the Venice Commission emphasized that it was the first time when in those changes and amendments they are taken into account. This is about self-governments and two-chamber parliament and forming the government from only one source, not from two, like it is done today, and that's why it causes troubles. And there are many classical things for the countries of such governance. That's why I hope that the national discussions that will be finalized on the 1st of December about the constitution will bring civil initiative that will make the parliament come through the range of procedures, and then the draft will be sent to the Constitutional Court for final decision making. This is the only way to settle what's not been settled constitutionally. No other arrangements can solve the problem. That's why there are many other things, but when we speak about the foundations, why there is a coalition in the parliament and there is no majority in the parliament, why the government is not formed, and why not all the ministers are appointed, why the parliament actually stays idle. Or I once calculated that they produce from 8 to 10 laws a month produced by the This means that there are fundamental things which are about the governance, so the only way is to introduce changes and then through the parliament, through public discussions, to solve those problems for the nation. And I already addressed to the nation with such an initiative, saying if we want to see the Ukrainian government and relations between the government, the parliament and the president in a classical way, we need to put classical foundation for forming the national power. And I hope that it will be the basic response to and the remedy to that political instability existing today in the parliament, where we actually have blocked situation by two factions. This is either one faction that blocks the parliament, or the prime minister's faction starts blocking the tribune, but there's always somebody who tries to block it. This is abnormal. I don't think there is such a situation anywhere in the world when the prime minister's faction blocks the parliament. I don't think it exists anywhere. But this is the reality that means that the answer to such challenges can be given in a purely constitutional manner, and that's what democracy is for. There are mistakes that not we made, they were made before us. They are about the Constitution's body. You cannot give a different answer if it is not regulated by the fundamental law. That's why I'm very optimistic, and I'm sure that this is democracy that gives the chance to respond to such challenges. I thank you very much.
Mr. Mr. President, thank you for those comprehensive remarks. And with your permission, I'd like to go directly to the membership and invite them to ask questions. After I select you, please wait for a microphone, speak directly into it, and stand first and state your name and affiliation. And please limit yourself to one question and keep it as concise as possible to allow as many as possible to speak.
Hello, Jonathan Tepperman from Newsweek International. Is Russia acting to destabilize Ukraine at the moment by distributing Russian passports in the Crimea or various other related activities?
Чи свої паспорти у Криму та де-інде? I already called several things that I consider as those that destabilize the situation. If we speak about the State Duma's decision of 1993 that recognized that the city of Sebastopol is the Russian city. Obviously that is a destabilizing decision, and very few people pay attention to it today because it's been already 16 years after that. Apparently it is illegal, but this only means that in these relations there are things which make somebody's independence subdued and subdues territorial integrity and sovereign rights. When we speak about those passport issues, several months ago I once again instructed the prosecutor's office to make inspections of those facts. And it seems to be according to the last inspection's results. Citizenships of several hundreds of people were cancelled. Those are the people that started their service at the Black Sea Navy, counteragent. If speaking about the legal scale, the Ukrainian legislation does not allow to have double citizenship, so any combination with any part of the Ukrainian society that does not allow legitimate citizenship for the Ukrainian citizens of any other country. When such facts take place, we try to provide operative reaction to it. I think today this period is very important when we speak about the interference or non-interference. When there are only several months before the presidential election in January next year in Ukraine. So we obviously have to say that the presidential election is a sovereign right of the Ukrainian people. That no pressure, I mean informational, political or diplomatic, we would like to see from nowhere, including Russia. Obviously there is a fifth pillar. To be more correct, I'd say that there are politicians who would like to have and who are livened by such pressure. Those who would like to have information, financial or any other support from Russia. They want to be engaged in economic projects. And I do not accept it as a citizen, as the president. You know, those are residues that still remain from those times when Ukraine was colonized. And we could only dream about our independence for 350 years. Not all the politicians live with the national idea in their hearts. Not all of them think about the eternal Ukraine. I think the hardest for the nation, which has the history of 300 years like Ukraine does, apparently the hardest thing is to answer to the question how to make a good nation from the nation that never had its state. How to create a nation with their own history, language, memory, tradition, culture. Of course we can accept all the cultures, but if we don't have our own culture, then there is a natural question. What is this nation about? Is this a genuine nation, or is it just stepchildren of some others? For foster children. And these acts are cannot only be made by the Orange Revolution. We need to find 46 million keys to those people's hearts, and we need to wake up something that genetically remains somewhere with the people. But in some of the cases, it's already lost. The feeling that you're Ukrainian, you're free, you have your own country, and you are to choose the president in the country. This is your right. And not just to trade your feelings of freedom and will. So this is actually what was called the Orange Revolution, how to bring self-sufficiency to the nation back. And I'm very optimistic about that, in a sense. The Ukrainian people, from month to month, become more Ukrainian. They form their own nation with their values, with their attributes of national life. Dependency on other influences. I'm not going to name the side where it comes from, not to make neighbors embarrassed, but just theoretically speaking, that the influence of the neighbors, it's not because it's getting smaller, it's not getting smaller because of its strength or weakness, it's getting smaller because people no longer react to it that much. Nation is getting changed. People start thinking, and people understand that at the end of the day, this is their sovereign right. And there are more and more people like that every year. That's why I'm very optimistic. Solving the issue, who will be the president of Ukraine in 2017, will not be out of Ukraine. However, there will be a desire to do that, how to decide this issue somewhere abroad. But the answer will be remarkable, and it will be given by the 4 to 6 million Ukrainians.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm David Malpas with Encima Global. Mr. President, thank you for speaking with us today. I wonder if you could give us your vision of what will happen with the currency itself and how that affects the growth and the outlook for Ukraine? Is it an important issue? What other economic issues might be as important? Thank you.
Що зараз взагалі відбувається в економічному житті? Які зрушення? If speaking about the economic life and the challenges that are the most sensitive, I'd like to say this is about national currency stability, stability of prices, and budget. Three things that I think it's worth paying attention to. What is and what are the processes that we still have to work on? If we speak about the problem of prices and inflation problem, exchange rate, then last year, I want to be frank, without any reproaches, the populistic policy proposed a very weak budget for the last year. For instance, in January last year, social expenses increased by 65% just in January. 75% in 1 month. It obviously led to the situation that the government lost control over the prices, and the inflation was of annual index 16.4%. Just the government disbursed the annual inflation within a month. It's not because of the weak budget policy, but the cash flow was so much intensive, and as you know, they are not very manageable. That's why they erupted with the inflation. And I think a big problem of the last year for the government and for the central bank was a very big trade deficit. We had the deficit of trade in of commodities and services, and the current account was minus 18 billion. It was one of the biggest problems that imposed very big pressure on the national currency. The account of financial operations and the current account looked very optimistic. We had 12 billion investment over the last year, and therefore since 2008 we had very weak traces of not successful budget policy and trade policy, while the investment were good. The investment was good. That's how the problem looked like last year, and that's how this year started. In 2009, we managed to settle and adjust the trade balance, and right now there is no longer a disbalance of 18 billion, but we seriously had to sacrifice our national currency. The only step that led to the stabilization of trade balance was a very deep devaluation of the national currency by 52% in 2008. Today, in the same way, we managed to fix our trade balance, but because of the global financial crisis, this year has around $12 billion drop in foreign currency inflow. For that, we had to sign the agreement with the IMF to compensate those $12 billion through deposits paid, through declining investment, to replace those funds with the resources of the International Monetary Fund. You know, we already signed the agreement, we already received 3 tranches, and today the foreign exchange reserves of our country are the same like they were at the beginning of the year, around 26 to 28 billion US dollars. So there is no such a big problem that could be interpreted as, I mean, on the corporate level, as the problem of the financial operations account and the problem of foreign exchange reserves. We don't have these problems. There's a third problem, which is very serious about pricing and exchange policy. This is a very weak budget. I think the budget Ukraine today has and the government promised to revisit several times and never find time to do that. The budget is probably the weakest link in the financial stability construction. The budget is approved on the level of the last year's incomes, while the last year was very successful about the inflows from the taxes. But the mistake of the government was that the 2009 budget was calculated exactly on the basis of the last year. We expect, for instance, according to the IMF's assessments, we foresee the decline of GDP by 13%, minus 13, while if considering last year's revenues, the budget is lower by 30%. It's 30% lower from the actual revenues of the last year. Well, it's just comparing revenues of the last year and this year. So this is actually the problem, which is probably the sharpest, and it's brought into foreign currency obligations of the government, and it will be very hard for the government to serve them. And the non-performing sovereign debt the government has, which will also have to be served. So this is not a problem of the foreign currency reserves, foreign exchange reserves, but this is the problem of the budget's non-performing obligations, including for public and corporate structures. So I think this is the number one problem. The budget is very weak, mellow, and it's nothing about anti-crisis measures. The country that's trying to find the crisis should have much stricter budget and more weighted budget policy. Sorry for my long answer.
Let's try one last question, please.
Thank you. Ruthard Murphy, New York Life Investments. Mr. President, what's your assessment of the Obama administration canceling plans for the European missile shield, and what impact do you think that'll have on your relationships with Russia?
Well, I promised not to be telling anything wrong about neighbors and friends. Well, I'll try to give a delicate answer to your question. Obviously, what is to be deployed in the Polish and Czech territory is the competence of the people of Czech Republic and Poland. Apparently, if the interests coincide with the American administration, then it would be really good if we speak about any defense initiative, including when we speak about the European continent and how to strengthen it, how to make it more efficient. In other words, when we speak about the defense component of the international policy, in my opinion, this is always good. This is my personal conviction. to make defense stronger and make it more efficient is always good. And this gives more benefits than the policy of risk balances, because the risk management and the risk balancement is the policy of is not a stable policy. But when we try to ensure the concept of pan-European and Euro-Atlantic security in this very situation, including the American component, I think that this should be perceived correctly by the parties that are involved, or the parties that have to do or have to deal with the answer to this. Because, once again, to be more precise, I think we have to be more about the initiatives to strengthen our defense, and this is probably the way of developing the situation, whether we speak about European or non-European territory. At the end of the day, this is the right of any nation to have the most sufficient defense doctrine. That's why strengthening the defense component, I think, has to be welcomed and developed. If you could understand my answer, I would be very grateful.
We've come to the end of the meeting. Mr. President, I want to thank you very much for being with us, for your useful and interesting remarks, and we hope to have you back again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you for watching this Council on Foreign Relations video. For additional audio, video, and transcripts of CFR meetings, as well as expert analysis of international news, please visit us online at cfr.org.